The dust kicked up from the wagon wheels settled on Maria Santos like a fine blanket of despair. She clutched her 3-month-old son, Diego, closer to her chest as the rickety wagon bounced along the rough trail toward Copper Ridge. The baby whimpered softly, sensing his mother's fear even through his hunger and discomfort. Maria's dark eyes scanned the barren landscape ahead. Red rocks jutted from the earth like broken teeth, and scraggly mesquite bushes dotted the horizon. This was not the life she had imagined when she married Roberto Santos 2 years ago. That dream had died with her husband 6 months earlier, killed by bandits who had raided their small ranch outside El Paso. "Almost there, señorita," called out Jake Morley from the driver's seat. His voice carried a false cheerfulness that made Maria's stomach turn. She had learned not to trust that tone during the 3 days they had been traveling together. Jake was a thin man with yellowed teeth and eyes that never seemed to focus on any one thing for long. He wore a dusty black coat that had seen better days and a hat with a bullet hole through the crown. When he had approached her in El Paso, claiming to know of work for a young widow, Maria had been desperate enough to believe him. "What kind of work?" she had asked, bouncing Diego in her arms as she stood outside the general store where she had been trying to sell her wedding ring for food money. "Cooking, cleaning, taking care of a household," Jake had said with that same oily smile. "Fellow up in Copper Ridge lost his wife recently, needs help with his place, good pay, room and board included." Maria had hesitated. Something about Jake Morley made her skin crawl, but Diego had been crying from hunger for 2 days, and she had nowhere else to turn. Her own family was dead, killed in the same raid that took Roberto. She had no friends in El Paso, no money, and no prospects. "How much pay?" she had asked. $50 a month plus food and shelter, Jake had replied. "More money than you'll see anywhere else. I guarantee it." It had seemed too good to be true, but Maria's desperation had outweighed her caution. She had agreed to go with him, though she had insisted on keeping her few remaining possessions, including Roberto's rifle, which she kept hidden beneath a blanket in the wagon. Now, as they approached Copper Ridge, Maria's unease had grown into full-blown terror. During their journey, Jake's stories about her new employer had changed several times. First, he was a rancher who needed a housekeeper. Then he became a businessman who wanted a cook. By the second day, Jake was talking about a man who appreciated the company of a pretty young woman. When Maria had demanded to know the truth, Jake had laughed and told her it didn't matter what she wanted anymore. She had made a bargain, and she was going to honor it, whether she liked it or not. "See those buildings up ahead?" Jake pointed with his whip toward a cluster of structures nestled in a valley between 2 rocky hills. "That's Copper Ridge, your new home." Maria could see smoke rising from several chimneys and people moving about in the dusty streets. It looked like any other frontier town, but to her, it might as well have been a prison. She had no money to leave, no way to get back to El Paso, and no idea what fate awaited her. As they rolled into town, curious faces peered out from doorways and windows. Maria pulled her shawl up over her head, trying to hide her face. She noticed that many of the buildings looked run down, and several appeared to be saloons or gambling halls. This was clearly not the respectable farming community Jake had described. The wagon stopped in front of a large 2-story building with peeling paint and a crooked sign that read, "Silver Dollar Saloon." Maria's blood ran cold. This was definitely not a private ranch or businessman's home. "Here we are," Jake announced, climbing down from the driver's seat. "Time to meet your new employer." Before Maria could protest, a large man emerged from the saloon. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and a thick mustache. He wore a fancy vest with gold buttons and carried himself like a man used to being obeyed. Behind him came 2 other men, both wearing guns at their hips. "So this is the little dove you promised me, Jake," the big man said, looking Maria up and down like she was livestock at market. "She's prettier than you described." "Thank you, Mr. Callahan," Jake replied, tipping his hat. "Just like I promised, young, healthy, and with no family to come looking for her." Maria's heart pounded as she realized the full extent of her situation. She was not here to be a housekeeper or cook. She was here to be something much worse, and she had walked right into the trap. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There has been a mistake. I was told I would be working as a housekeeper." Callahan laughed, a sound like grinding rocks. "Oh, you'll be working all right. Just not the kind of work you were expecting." He gestured to the two men behind him. "Boys, help the lady with her things." As the men approached the wagon, Maria clutched Diego tighter. The baby began to cry, sensing the tension in his mother's body. She looked around desperately, hoping someone would help her, but the few townspeople who had gathered to watch kept their distance. "Wait," she said, finding her voice. "I have money. I can pay you to take me back to El Paso." "What money?" Jake scoffed. "You couldn't even afford food for your baby when I found you." Callahan stepped closer to the wagon. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, girl. You're here now and you belong to me. That was the deal Jake made on your behalf." "I never agreed to any such deal," Maria protested, but even as she said it, she knew it didn't matter. In a place like Copper Ridge, far from any law or civilization, a man like Callahan could do whatever he wanted. "Your baby will be well cared for," Callahan said, though his tone suggested anything but kindness. "We have women here who can wet nurse him while you earn your keep." The thought of being separated from Diego gave Maria a surge of desperate courage. She had to get out of this situation, not just for herself, but for her son. Roberto had died protecting their family, and she would not let his sacrifice be in vain. As one of Callahan's men reached for her arm, Maria pulled away. "Don't touch me," she said firmly. The man laughed and grabbed her anyway, pulling her roughly from the wagon. Diego's cries grew louder as his mother struggled against her captor. Other people on the street stopped to watch, but no one moved to help. Just then, a new voice cut through the commotion. "That's enough." Everyone turned to see a tall man walking toward them from across the street. He wore worn leather chaps, a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen many years under the sun. Unlike the other men, he carried himself with quiet confidence rather than swagger. His face was weathered but kind, and his brown eyes held a steadiness that made Maria feel, for the first moment since arriving in Copper Ridge, that someone might actually help her. "This doesn't concern you, Rourke," Callahan said, his voice carrying a warning. The man called Rourke continued walking until he stood just a few feet away. Maria could see that he was probably in his 30s, with calloused hands and the easy manner of someone who spent his life working with horses and cattle. There was something about him that reminded her of Roberto, a quiet strength that needed no boasting. "When I see a woman being forced into something against her will, it concerns me," Rourke said calmly, "especially when she's got a baby to think about." Callahan's face reddened. "I paid good money for her, Rourke. Jake brought her here fair and square." "Did she agree to come here knowing what you had planned?" Rourke asked, looking directly at Maria. "No," she said quickly. "I was told I would be working as a housekeeper. I was deceived." Rourke nodded as if this confirmed what he already suspected. "Then there's no deal to honor." "Now you listen here," Jake interjected, stepping forward. "She came with me of her own free will. Whatever happens now is between her and Mr. Callahan." Rourke's gaze shifted to Jake, and something in his expression made the smaller man take a step back. "Jake Morley, isn't it? I've heard about you. You make a living trafficking women to places like this." "That's a lie," Jake protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "The lady and her baby are coming with me," Rourke announced, extending his hand toward Maria. Callahan's men moved their hands closer to their guns. "Like hell they are," Callahan growled. "I've got rights here." "The only right you have," Rourke said, his own hand moving casually to rest on the butt of his pistol, is to let this woman and her child walk away. Unless you want to explain to Sheriff Morrison why you're forcing unwilling women to work in your establishment. Maria noticed that several more people had gathered to watch the confrontation. Some of them looked like they might side with Rourke if things turned violent. Callahan seemed to notice this too because his aggressive stance relaxed slightly. "This isn't over, Rourke," Callahan said finally. "That woman owes me for her passage here." "Send the bill to Jake," Rourke replied. "He's the one who made promises he couldn't keep." Without waiting for a response, Rourke stepped forward and gently helped Maria down from the wagon. His touch was respectful and careful, nothing like the rough handling she had just experienced. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I'm Connor Rourke. I've got a ranch about 5 miles outside town. You and your baby are welcome to stay there until you can figure out what you want to do next." Maria looked into his eyes and saw only sincerity. After days of fear and uncertainty, the offer of genuine help nearly brought her to tears. "Why would you help us?" she asked. "You don't even know us." Connor smiled, and the expression transformed his weathered face. "My mother always taught me that a man's character is measured by how he treats those who can't help themselves. Besides," he added, glancing at little Diego, "that little fellow reminds me of my nephew back in Colorado." Behind them, Callahan was arguing with Jake about who was responsible for the lost investment. Connor ignored them and focused on Maria. "What's your name, ma'am?" he asked. "Maria Santos," she replied. "And this is my son, Diego." "Well, Maria Santos, if you'll trust me, I promise you'll both be safe at my ranch. I've got a housekeeper named Mrs. Chen who would love to fuss over a baby, and there's plenty of work if you want to earn your keep, honestly." Maria felt a surge of hope for the first time in months. This man was offering her exactly what she had thought she was coming to Copper Ridge to find: honest work, safety, and a chance to build a new life for herself and Diego. "Thank you," she whispered. "We would be very grateful." Connor nodded and turned to face Callahan one more time. "If I hear that you or any of your men have bothered Mrs. Santos or her baby, you'll answer to me. Are we clear?" Callahan glared at him, but said nothing. Jake was already slinking away, apparently deciding that whatever payment he might have received wasn't worth the trouble. Connor helped Maria gather her few possessions from the wagon, including the hidden rifle, which he noticed but didn't comment on. As they prepared to leave, Maria felt Diego finally stop crying. It was as if even her baby sensed that their luck had finally changed. "My horse and wagon are just down the street," Connor said. "It's not a fancy ride, but it'll get us to the ranch before dark." As they walked away from the Silver Dollar Saloon, Maria couldn't help but look back one more time at the place that had nearly become her prison. She shuddered and pulled Diego closer, then turned her attention to the man who had rescued them. Connor Rourke had appeared like an answer to her prayers, but Maria had learned to be cautious about trusting too quickly. Still, as they approached his wagon and he helped her up with the same gentle respect he had shown from the beginning, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, her nightmare was finally over. The sun was beginning to set as they left Copper Ridge behind, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. For the first time since Roberto's death, Maria felt like she and Diego might have a chance at a real future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, under the protection of a man who had proven himself willing to stand up for what was right. The first thing Maria noticed about Connor Rourke's ranch was how peaceful it felt. As their wagon crested a small hill and the buildings came into view, she saw a modest but well-maintained collection of structures nestled in a green valley. A 2-story farmhouse with a wide front porch sat at the center, surrounded by a large barn, several corrals, and smaller outbuildings. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures that stretched toward distant mountains. and she could hear the gentle sound of water running somewhere nearby. "It's beautiful," Maria said softly, meaning every word. Connor smiled as he guided the wagon down the slope. "My father started this place 23 years ago. It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's home." As they approached the main house, a small, energetic woman emerged from the front door. She appeared to be in her 50s, with graying black hair pulled back in a neat bun and wearing a practical brown dress covered by a clean white apron. When she saw the wagon approaching, her face lit up with curiosity. "Mrs. Sao Chen," Connor called out as he brought the wagon to a stop. "I'd like you to meet Mrs. Maria Santos and her son Diego. They'll be staying with us for a while." Mrs. Chen hurried over, her dark eyes immediately focusing on the baby in Maria's arms. "Oh my," she said in accented English. "What a beautiful little one. How old is he?" 3 months, Maria replied, climbing down from the wagon with Connor's help. 3 months, Mrs. Chen exclaimed. "Such a precious age. Come inside. You both must be tired and hungry." As they walked toward the house, Mrs. Chen chattered away in a mixture of English and what sounded like Chinese, clearly delighted to have guests. Maria learned that Mrs. Chen had been working for the Rourke family for over 15 years, ever since her husband died in a mining accident. She managed the household with the efficiency of someone who took great pride in her work. The interior of the house was simple but comfortable. Clean wooden floors were covered with colorful rugs, and the furniture showed signs of regular use and careful maintenance. The main room featured a large stone fireplace, several well-worn chairs, and shelves lined with books. Everything was spotlessly clean and organized. "You must be exhausted," Mrs. Chen said, leading Maria toward a staircase. "I'll show you to your room, and then we'll get some food into both of you." The room Mrs. Chen led her to was on the second floor, facing west toward the mountains. It contained a comfortable bed covered with a handmade quilt, a dresser, a rocking chair by the window, and a small cradle that looked like it had been hastily moved in from somewhere else. "Connor asked me to set up the cradle," Mrs. Chen explained. "It was his when he was a baby. His mother would be happy to know it's being used again." Maria felt tears pricking her eyes. After months of uncertainty and fear, such simple kindness felt overwhelming. "Thank you," she managed. "You're both so generous." "Nonsense," Mrs. Chen replied briskly. "This house has been too quiet for too long. It needs the sound of a baby again." She looked at Diego, who was sleeping peacefully in Maria's arms. "Let me help you get him settled, and then we'll have dinner." An hour later, Maria found herself sitting at a large wooden table in the kitchen, sharing the best meal she had eaten in months. Mrs. Chen had prepared roast beef with vegetables from her garden, fresh bread, and apple pie that smelled like heaven. Connor had changed out of his work clothes and joined them, his manner as easy and welcoming as it had been in town. "So tell me," he said as they ate, "what were you planning to do before Jake Morley found you?" Maria hesitated, still not entirely comfortable sharing her story with these strangers, no matter how kind they seemed. But something about Connor's steady gaze and Mrs. Chen's motherly presence made her feel safe enough to open up. "My husband, Roberto, and I had a small ranch outside El Paso," she began. "We raised horses and grew some crops. It wasn't much, but it was ours." She paused, swallowing hard. 6 months ago, bandits raided our place. They killed Roberto and burned everything. I barely escaped with Diego. Connor's expression grew serious. "I'm sorry for your loss. That must have been terrifying." "I tried to make it on my own in El Paso," Maria continued. "But I had no money and no family. When Jake found me, I was desperate. I should have known his offer was too good to be true." "Don't blame yourself," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Men like Jake Morley make a living preying on desperate people. You did what you thought was best for your baby." Connor nodded in agreement. "What matters is that you're both safe now. As for what comes next, that's up to you. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. I want to work, Maria said quickly. I won't take charity. I can cook, clean, help with the animals. I know horses. Well then, Connor said with a smile. It sounds like we might be able to help each other out. I could use an extra hand around here, and Mrs. Chen has been saying for months that this place is too much for one person to manage. Over the following days, Maria settled into life at the ranch with surprising ease. She discovered that Connor had been too modest when he described his operation. The ranch was actually quite prosperous, with over 200 head of cattle and a thriving horse breeding program. Connor employed 3 other hands, an older man named Bill Hawkins, who had worked for Connor's father, and 2 younger men, Pete and Miguel, who treated Connor with obvious respect and loyalty. Maria threw herself into the work with determination. She helped Mrs. Chen with cooking and cleaning, tended the vegetable garden, and assisted with feeding the chickens and gathering eggs. In the afternoons, when Diego was napping, she often worked in the corrals with the horses. Connor was surprised to discover that she hadn't exaggerated her knowledge. She had a natural way with the animals that impressed even Bill Hawkins, who was notoriously difficult to please. That little gal knows what she's doing, Bill told Connor one evening as they watched Maria work with a skittish young mare. Most people would have given up on this horse by now, but look at her go. Connor was indeed watching, and what he saw impressed him greatly. Maria approached the nervous horse with infinite patience, speaking softly in Spanish and moving slowly until the animal began to trust her. It reminded him of his father's approach to training horses, firm but kind, based on understanding rather than force. As the weeks passed, Maria began to relax for the first time since Roberto's death. Diego was thriving under Mrs. Chen's doting attention, and Maria felt useful and valued. Connor treated her as an equal, asking for her opinions on ranch matters and listening seriously to her suggestions. The other hands were respectful and friendly, and she began to feel like she was part of something special. But their peace was shattered on a warm Thursday morning when Jake Morley rode up to the ranch house with 3 other men. Connor was working in the barn when he heard the horses approaching. He walked outside to see Jake dismounting near the front porch, his usual oily smile nowhere to be found. The 3 men with him looked rough and mean, with the kind of hard faces that suggested they made their living through violence. "Morning, Rourke," Jake called out. "I'm here to collect what's mine." "You're not welcome here, Morley," Connor replied, walking toward the group with his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "I suggest you ride on." "Not without the woman and her baby," Jake said. "She owes Mr. Callahan money for her transportation, and he's sent us to collect." At that moment, Maria emerged from the chicken coop carrying a basket of eggs. When she saw Jake and his companions, her face went pale, and she nearly dropped the basket. "You have no claim on Mrs. Santos or her child," Connor said firmly. "She was brought here under false pretenses, and she's staying here of her own free will." One of Jake's companions, a large man with a scarred face and dead eyes, spoke up. "Mr. Callahan says he's owed $500 for her passage and room and board. She can work it off at the Silver Dollar, or you can pay it now." "The hell I will," Connor replied. "There's no debt here except the one Jake owes for lying to this woman." From the porch, Mrs. Chen appeared with a shotgun in her hands. She didn't point it at anyone, but her message was clear. Bill Hawkins also emerged from the barn, and Maria noticed that Pete and Miguel had materialized from somewhere and were standing ready to back up their boss. "This doesn't have to get ugly," Jake said, though his nervous glance around the yard suggested he was reconsidering his approach. "Just hand over the woman and we'll be on our way." "The only way anyone leaves this ranch," Connor said, his voice deadly calm, "is if Mrs. Santos wants to go. And something tells me that's not the case." All eyes turned to Maria. She was frightened. Jake and his men looked capable of terrible things, but she was also angry. These men wanted to drag her back to a life of degradation and force her to be separated from Diego. After weeks of feeling safe and valued, the thought of returning to that nightmare gave her courage. "I'm staying here," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I have work to do and people who care about my son and me. You have no right to take us anywhere." Jake's face darkened. "You made a deal, lady. Callahan invested good money in bringing you here." "The only deal I made was to work as a housekeeper," Maria shot back. "If Mr. Callahan wants someone to work in his saloon, he can find women who choose that life willingly." The scarred man started to move toward Maria, but Connor stepped between them. "That's far enough," he said quietly. The tension in the yard was thick enough to cut. Maria clutched her basket of eggs and tried to control her fear. Diego was inside the house, safely sleeping, but if violence erupted, she didn't know what might happen. "I'll make you a deal, Rourke," Jake said after a long moment. "Callahan wants $500. You pay half of that, and we'll call it square." Connor's laugh held no humor. "I wouldn't give Callahan or you 1 red cent. If you want money, try honest work for a change." Jake's face flushed red. "You're making a mistake, Rourke. Callahan has friends in this territory, important friends." "So do I," Connor replied. "And mine don't traffic in human misery." For a moment, it looked like the situation might explode into violence. The scarred man's hand hovered near his gun, and Maria held her breath. But then Jake seemed to realize that he was outnumbered and outgunned. Even if he and his men could take Connor and his hands, there would be witnesses, and killing a respected rancher would bring more attention than Callahan would want. "This isn't over," Jake said, mounting his horse. "Callahan doesn't forget debts." "Neither do I," Connor replied. "And Callahan owes a debt to every woman he's forced into his business. Remind him of that." As Jake and his men rode away, Maria felt her legs go weak with relief. Connor was beside her in an instant, steadying her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Are you all right?" he asked. Maria nodded, though she was trembling slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "All of you. I don't know what would have happened if—" "Don't think about it," Mrs. Chen interrupted, appearing at Maria's side. "You're safe, and that's what matters." But even as the immediate danger passed, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Jake's threats had sounded sincere, and she knew that men like Callahan didn't give up easily. She had brought danger to these good people who had shown her nothing but kindness. That evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset, Maria voiced her concerns to Connor. "Maybe I should leave," she said quietly. "I don't want to bring trouble to your ranch." Connor was quiet for a long moment, rocking slowly in his chair as he considered her words. Finally, he spoke. "Maria, I'm going to tell you something my father told me when I was a boy. He said that sometimes life puts us in positions where we have to choose between what's easy and what's right. Running away might be easier, but it wouldn't be right." He turned to look at her, his brown eyes serious in the fading light. "You and Diego belong here now. This is your home, and I'll protect it the same way I'd protect any member of my family." The word family hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge directly. Maria felt her heart skip a beat, partly from fear and partly from something else she wasn't ready to name. "Besides," Connor added with a slight smile, "Mrs. Chen would never forgive me if I let you take Diego away. She's been knitting him enough sweaters to last until he's 10 years old." Despite her worries, Maria found herself smiling. It was true. Mrs. Chen had become completely devoted to Diego, spending her evenings knitting and sewing for him, while telling stories about her own childhood in China. "What about Jake's threat?" Maria asked. "He seemed serious about Callahan having important friends." Connor's expression grew thoughtful. "There are good people in this territory and bad people. The trick is making sure the good ones stick together. He paused. Tomorrow I'm going to ride into Copper Ridge and have a talk with Sheriff Morrison. It's time he knew what Callahan has been up to. As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, Maria felt a sense of peace despite the day's events. She was no longer facing her challenges alone. She had found people who cared about her and Diego, people who were willing to stand up for what was right. Inside the house, she could hear Mrs. Chen humming as she cleaned up after dinner, and somewhere in the distance, one of the hands was playing a harmonica. It was the sound of home, real and warm and safe. For the first time since Roberto's death, Maria began to think about the future not with fear, but with hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she wouldn't face them alone. She had found something precious here at the ranch, not just safety and work, but the beginning of a new kind of family, and she was determined to fight for it. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with the promise of another beautiful day. Maria was in the kitchen, helping Mrs. B. Chen prepare breakfast when Connor came in from his morning chores, his face serious but determined. "I'm riding into town today to see Sheriff Morrison," he announced, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. It's time someone told him what's really going on at the Silver Dollar. Maria felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. What if Callahan has already gotten to the sheriff? Jake said he had important friends. Connor took a sip of his coffee and considered her concern. Tom Morrison is a good man. I've known him for 15 years, and he's never been the type to look the other way when something's wrong. If he knows what Callahan is doing, he'll put a stop to it. Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly as she flipped pancakes on the griddle. Sheriff Morrison helped my nephew when those men from the mining company tried to cheat him out of his wages. He's fair. After breakfast, Connor prepared to leave for Copper Ridge. As he saddled his horse, Maria approached him with something she had been thinking about all night. "I want to come with you," she said. Connor paused in checking his cinch. "That might not be safe. If Callahan sees you in town." "If I'm going to live here, I can't hide forever," Maria interrupted. "Besides, if you're going to talk to the sheriff about what happened to me, shouldn't I be there to tell my own story?" Connor studied her face and saw the determination there. After a moment, he nodded. "You're right. Mrs. Chen, can you watch Diego?" "Of course," Mrs. Chen replied, bouncing the baby gently in her arms. "This little one and I will have a grand time together, won't we, sweetheart?" An hour later, Connor and Maria rode into Copper Ridge side by side. The town looked different to Maria in the daylight, less threatening, but still rough around the edges. As they made their way down the main street toward the sheriff's office, she noticed several people staring at her. Word had apparently gotten around about the confrontation at the Silver Dollar. Sheriff Tom Morrison was a tall, lean man in his 40s, with prematurely gray hair and intelligent blue eyes. When Connor explained why they had come, Morrison listened carefully, asking detailed questions about Jake Morley's deception and Callahan's operation. "I've suspected something wasn't right at the Silver Dollar for a while now," Morrison admitted. "There have been too many young women arriving in town with no money and no way to leave, but without someone willing to file a formal complaint." "I'm willing," Maria said firmly. "I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Morrison nodded approvingly. "That's brave of you, Mrs. Santos. I'll need you to make a sworn statement about what happened." As Maria related her story to the sheriff, Connor found himself admiring her courage even more. It couldn't be easy to relive those frightening moments, but she spoke clearly and calmly, providing all the details Morrison needed. "This is exactly what I needed," Morrison said when she finished. "With your testimony, I can get a warrant to search Callahan's operation. If I find evidence that he's been forcing women to work against their will, I can shut him down." Just as they were finishing up, a commotion outside caught their attention. Through the window, they could see a crowd gathering in the street. Morrison stood up and reached for his gun belt. "Stay here," he told Connor and Maria. Let me see what's going on. But as Morrison opened the office door, Callahan himself strode in, flanked by two of his men. His face was red with anger, and his eyes blazed as they fixed on Maria. "There she is," he said, pointing an accusing finger at her. "The little thief who owes me $500. "Now hold on, Callahan," Morrison said, his hand resting on his gun. "We don't burst into my office making accusations." "It's not an accusation, it's a fact," Callahan retorted. "I paid for her transportation and housing, and now she's trying to skip out on the debt." Connor stood up slowly, placing himself between Callahan and Maria. "We've already been through this. There's no legitimate debt here." Callahan's eyes narrowed as he looked at Connor. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you, Rourke? Well, let me tell you something. Interfering with my business was a mistake." "The only mistake," Morrison interjected, "is thinking you can operate outside the law in my town." He stepped forward, his badge catching the light. "I've been hearing some interesting stories about your establishment, Callahan. Stories about women being forced to work against their will." Callahan's bluster faltered slightly. "That's ridiculous. All my girls work there by choice." "Is that so?" Morrison pulled out the statement Maria had just signed. "According to this sworn testimony, Jake Morley deceived Mrs. Santos about the nature of the work she would be doing. That sounds like fraud to me." "Jake Morley doesn't work for me," Callahan said quickly. "If he told her lies, that's on him." "But you were willing to collect payment from her based on those lies," Connor pointed out. "That makes you part of the fraud." The two men flanking Callahan moved restlessly, their hands hovering near their guns. The tension in the small office was becoming dangerous, and Maria could feel her heart racing. Morrison noticed the movement and stepped closer to Callahan. "I think it's time for you and your men to leave my office. And while you're thinking about what comes next, remember that Mrs. Santos has filed an official complaint. If anything happens to her or anyone protecting her, I'll know exactly where to look." Callahan glared at each of them in turn, his face twisted with anger. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Not by a long shot." As he turned to leave, his eyes met Maria's one more time. The hatred she saw there made her shiver, but she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. She had come too far to be intimidated now. After Callahan and his men left, Morrison shook his head. "That man is trouble, but you've given me what I need to deal with him legally. I'll have a warrant by tomorrow morning." As Connor and Maria prepared to leave, Morrison offered one more piece of advice. "Watch yourselves on the way home. Callahan's not the type to give up easily, and he might try something stupid." The ride back to the ranch was tense, with both Connor and Maria keeping an eye on the trail behind them. But they made it home without incident, where they found Mrs. Chen in the front yard hanging laundry, while Diego slept peacefully in a basket nearby. "How did it go?" Mrs. Chen asked as they dismounted. "Better than we hoped," Connor replied. "The sheriff is going to move against Callahan officially." That evening, as they sat down to dinner, the mood was optimistic but cautious. Bill Hawkins and the other hands had been told about the situation, and they were keeping extra watch around the ranch. Everyone hoped that Callahan would back down now that the law was involved, but they were prepared for trouble. Their preparations proved wise. 2 days later, Pete came racing back from checking the north pasture with disturbing news. "Someone's been cutting our fences," he reported. "Looks like they drove off about 30 head of cattle." Connor's jaw tightened. "Show me." The damage was worse than Pete had initially reported. Not only had the fence been cut in multiple places, but the thieves had taken some of the ranch's best breeding stock. It was clearly meant as both punishment and provocation. "This has Callahan written all over it," Bill said grimly. "He's trying to force you to back down by hurting your business." Connor stared at the ruined fence line, his anger carefully controlled. "Then he's made another mistake." That afternoon, Sheriff Morrison arrived at the ranch with a posse of 6 men. The warrant had been served, and what they found at the Silver Dollar had been worse than anyone expected. "We found 3 women locked in rooms upstairs," Morrison reported. "None of them were there willingly. And all of them had stories similar to yours, Mrs. Santos. We also found account books showing that Callahan has been trafficking women for years." "What about Callahan?" Connor asked. Morrison's expression grew grim. "He ran when he saw us coming. Word is he's holed up in the old mining camp about 20 miles north of here with a dozen armed men. He's threatening to kill anyone who comes after him." "And my cattle?" Connor asked. "Probably up there with him. But Connor, I have to warn you. If you're thinking about going after them yourself, don't. Callahan's desperate now, and desperate men do dangerous things." But Connor was already making plans. His cattle represented months of hard work and significant money. More importantly, allowing Callahan to steal from him with impunity would only encourage more lawlessness. "I'm going after them," he announced. "Then I'm going with you," Maria said firmly. Everyone turned to stare at her. "Absolutely not," Connor said immediately. "It's too dangerous." "Those cattle represent my future too," Maria replied. "This ranch is my home now, and I won't let Callahan destroy it." Mrs. Chen stepped forward, surprising everyone. "If Maria is determined to go, perhaps it would be safer to have her with you than to leave her here where Callahan might send men to take revenge." Connor started to argue, but Maria cut him off. "I can ride, I can shoot, and I know Callahan better than any of you. I might be helpful." After considerable debate, it was decided that Connor, Maria, Bill, and Pete would ride out at dawn to track down the stolen cattle. Sheriff Morrison would follow with his posse once he had organized more men. The next morning, as they prepared to leave, Mrs. Chen fussed over Diego one last time while Maria checked her rifle. She had retrieved Roberto's old weapon from her belongings, and Connor had helped her clean and sight it the evening before. "You don't have to do this," Connor told her quietly as they saddled their horses. Maria looked up at him, her dark eyes serious. "Yes, I do. This ranch has given me and Diego a future. I won't let anyone take that away without a fight." Connor felt something shift in his chest as he looked at her. Over the past weeks, he had watched Maria transform from a frightened, desperate woman into someone strong and determined. She had found her place here, not just as someone they were protecting, but as an equal partner in defending their home. The trail north led through rocky country, broken by deep canyons and thick stands of pine trees. They followed the tracks left by the stolen cattle, moving carefully to avoid any lookouts Callahan might have posted. By afternoon, they could see smoke rising from the old mining camp nestled in a valley between 2 ridges. Connor pulled out his field glasses and studied the settlement below. The cattle were there, confined in a makeshift corral near the main buildings. "I count at least 10 men," he reported. "Maybe more in the buildings." "So what's the plan?" Bill asked. Connor studied the terrain thoughtfully. The mining camp was in a defensible position, but it also offered limited escape routes. If they could position themselves correctly, they might be able to force Callahan to surrender without a major fight. "We wait until just before dawn," Connor decided. "Then we take positions on the ridges overlooking the camp. If we can convince them they're surrounded, they might give up without anyone getting hurt." As night fell, they made a cold camp in the trees above the mining settlement. Maria surprised the men by producing jerky and hardtack from her saddlebags, prepared for the journey by Mrs. Chen. "Your housekeeper thinks of everything," Bill commented as he chewed the tough but nourishing food. "She's been taking care of this family for 15 years, Connor replied. "She knows what we need." The word family hung in the air again, and Maria felt that same flutter in her chest she had experienced on the porch. She was beginning to realize that her feelings for Connor had grown beyond simple gratitude. He represented everything she had lost when Roberto died: strength, kindness, and the promise of a secure future. Just before dawn, they moved into position. Connor and Pete took the high ridge to the east, while Maria and Bill positioned themselves on the western slope. As the sun began to rise, Connor's voice echoed across the valley. "Callahan, this is Connor Rourke. You're surrounded. Send out the cattle and surrender, and nobody has to get hurt." The response was immediate. Gunfire erupted from several buildings in the camp, and Maria heard bullets whining off the rocks near her position. She pressed herself flat against the ground, waiting for Connor's next move. "Looks like they want to do this the hard way," Bill muttered beside her. For the next hour, sporadic gunfire was exchanged between the ridges and the camp below. Neither side seemed eager to escalate the conflict, but Callahan's men showed no signs of giving up. Then Maria spotted movement near the cattle corral. 3 men were trying to drive the stolen animals out of the back of the valley, apparently hoping to escape while the others kept Connor and his companions pinned down. "They're trying to get away with the cattle," she called to Bill. Bill squinted through the morning haze and saw what she meant. "We can't let them get those animals into the rough country beyond the valley. We'll never find them again." Maria made a quick decision. "Cover me," she said, and before Bill could protest, she was scrambling down the slope toward the corral. Her unexpected movement caught the cattle thieves off guard. They had been concentrating on watching the ridges, not expecting anyone to approach from their side. Maria reached the corral fence just as the 3 men were opening the gate to drive the cattle out. "Stop right there!" she called, raising her rifle. One of the men spun around, going for his gun, but Maria's shot dropped him before he could clear leather. The other 2 threw up their hands, clearly having no stomach for a gunfight with a determined woman who had already proven she could shoot. The sound of Maria's shot changed everything in the valley. Realizing that their escape route had been cut off and that they were truly surrounded, Callahan's men began calling for a parley. Callahan himself emerged from the main building, his hands raised, but his face twisted with fury. "All right, Rourke," he shouted, "you win this round, but this isn't over between us." "Yes, it is," Connor called back. "Sheriff Morrison will be here soon with a warrant for your arrest. Your only choice now is whether you surrender peacefully or try to run." Callahan's shoulders slumped as he realized his situation was hopeless. One by one, his men emerged from their hiding places, throwing down their weapons and raising their hands. As Connor and the others made their way down into the valley to secure the prisoners, Maria felt a profound sense of satisfaction. She had found her courage again, and she had helped protect the place that had become her home. When Sheriff Morrison arrived 2 hours later with his posse, he found the situation well in hand. Callahan and his men were securely tied up, the cattle were ready to be driven home, and Connor's small group was sharing coffee and congratulations around a campfire. "I see you didn't wait for reinforcements," Morrison said with a grin. "We had all the help we needed," Connor replied, looking meaningfully at Maria. The ride back to the ranch was triumphant, but exhausting. The cattle were tired from their ordeal, and it took most of the day to get them home safely. As they crested the final hill and saw the ranch buildings ahead, Maria felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Mrs. Chen was waiting on the front porch with Diego in her arms, and when she saw them approaching, she began waving excitedly. The baby seemed to sense his mother's return, squirming in Mrs. Chen's arms and making the happy gurgling sounds that had become so familiar around the ranch. As they reached the yard, Maria dismounted quickly and hurried to reclaim her son. Diego's face lit up when he saw her, and his tiny arms reached out as if he knew he was home. That evening, as they sat on the front porch watching another spectacular sunset, Connor finally found the words he had been searching for. "Maria," he began, "I have something I want to say." She looked at him expectantly, Diego sleeping peacefully in her arms. "When I offered to help you that day in Copper Ridge, I thought I was just doing the right thing for a stranger in trouble," Connor said. But somewhere along the way, you and Diego stopped being strangers. You became part of this family. Maria felt her heart racing as she waited for him to continue. I know it might be too soon, Connor went on, and I know you've been through a lot, but I've grown to love you both, and I can't imagine this place without you. He paused, gathering courage. I'm asking if you'll consider staying permanently. As my wife, if you'll have me. Maria felt tears of joy prickling her eyes. She had hoped he might feel the same way she did, but hearing the words still filled her with happiness beyond anything she had imagined possible. Yes, she said simply. Diego and I would be honored to be your family. Mrs. Chen, who had been pretending not to listen from the kitchen window, let out a small cheer of delight. As Connor leaned over to kiss Maria gently, Diego woke up and looked around at the adults with bright, curious eyes. It was as if he sensed that something important had just happened. Something that secured his future and his mother's happiness. We'll make it official as soon as possible, Connor said. I want everyone to know that you're both under my protection permanently. We're home, Maria whispered, looking around at the ranch that had become so precious to her. We're finally home. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the three of them sat together on the porch, planning their future as a family. The dangers they had faced were behind them now, and ahead lay all the promise of a life built on love, trust, and mutual respect. Diego gurgled happily in his mother's arms, as if he approved of the arrangements his elders had made. He would grow up on this ranch, learning to ride and work cattle, knowing that he was loved and protected by people who had chosen to be his family not out of obligation, but out of love. The nightmare that had begun with Roberto's death was finally over. In its place was something beautiful and lasting, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice, courage, and the determination to protect what mattered most.